Welcome, everybody. Today, I have a special guest, Marc Faber. He's the editor and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, www.gloomboomanddoom.com. And he is also the author of Tomorrow's Gold. All right, check that book out if you haven't already. Marc Faber, thank you very much for coming in today.
It's my pleasure and great honor.
Excellent.
And good day to all your viewers.
Thank you, Marc. Now, the big topic, obviously, today is inflation. Inflation is off the charts when you use, any metric. You want to use the PCE, you want to use the CPI, you measure it in Germany, you measure it in Canada, it's going crazy everywhere. So I think the real debate here is, will we go into a level of higher and higher and higher inflation, or will there be some sort of deflationary environment? What is your assumption and predictions here on that?
Well, if you talk about inflation, and if we define inflation as an increase in the quantity of money and the quantity of debts, then obviously we had inflation already for more than 30, 40 years. And some people have said in the 1990s and between 2000 and 2008 and even recently that, well, when asset prices go up and inflation is low, you can print as much money as you want, like the MMT advocates and prophets that said, unlike a household, when a household, or say your household, borrows money, then one day it has to pay interest on the money that you borrowed, and you may get into trouble if you borrow too much. But they argued, well, governments are different. They can always print money and there's never any damage. And this was for a while widely accepted and, of course, applauded by Wall Street, because Wall Street, all they can applaud to is when stocks, real estate, and everything goes up, because with it, their fees go up. You understand? It's as simple as that. And just recently, the hero of the meme stock followers, Cathy Wood, she said the Fed shouldn't increase interest rates at all because she doesn't care. She doesn't go shopping. With her income, her food bill is maybe 2-3% of her income. But for a poor family, for most people, say at least 50% of the population that isn't affluent, that is struggling, for them, if energy prices and food prices go up, it is a burden, because they spend maybe 30% of their income just on food and necessities of life. Rich people like I hardly spend any money on necessities. The highest expenditure in my life are cigarettes and beer. But the rest, food is not a big expenditure. But what I want to say is, for 30 or 40 years, each time the Fed intervened and lowered interest rates and made sure the stock market would go up, the investment community, and I belong to it, but we are all a bunch of car repair salesmen. You understand? We don't want the best for the customer. We do things that are modestly dishonorable and unethical, or highly unethical. That's the industry is built on that, on commissions and retrocessions and kickbacks and front running and all that. That's the industry. That's the way it's built. And the SEC has nothing to do with the protection of individual investors, but the protection of big gamblers, of big investors and of the money establishment of Wall Street. It's like the Consumer Council has nothing to do with protecting the consumer, has to do with protecting the industry. And the FDA protects the healthcare industry, it doesn't protect the guy who takes the wrong vaccines and so forth. Anyway, that's the way the system is. And this has existed for a long time. Now, the peculiarity of inflation, and this has been already discussed by one of the first observers of inflation, namely Copernicus, is that when the money drops, as Bernanke explained, from the sky into the earth, what the central banks don't know is where it will flow to. So it can flow into real estate and then real estate prices go up, or it can flow into stock prices, then stocks go up, or it can flow into bond prices, then bond prices go up and interest rates go down, or it can flow into commodities, and it can also flow into wages and salaries and into consumer prices. And so for the period 1980 to recently, it's flown mainly into asset prices. And everybody said, great, everything goes up. It's a sign that the economy is healthy and that the US is the superpower and healthy and so forth. And now they notice that we have rising prices. You know, in Europe, in Spain, consumer prices are rising at more than 10%. In Holland, the same. And this is logical because the euro has been weak against the US dollar. So if the US has inflation at between, it depends on which household, you understand? Are you alone? Do you have children? Do you have to pay a lot for healthcare? Where do you live? Each city has a different inflation rate. Each household has a different inflation rate. If you have people that are on healthcare, your inflation is through the sky. If you have children in public schools or in private schools, as you say in America, the costs are going up a lot anyway. But it's between 7 and 12%, I guess. So some people say it's 15%, but maybe it's just 7 to 12%. But the Fed, nowadays, the brain damaged employees that never have any responsibility, because when they fail, they're not fired, they get their pensions and everything. These bureaucrats of lower quality and lower education, they debate whether they should increase interest rates by 0.25% to 0.5%. Everybody laughed in the 70s about Arthur Burns because he was behind the rate of inflation. But when the inflation was as high as it is now, his discount rate, at that time you talked about the discount rate and the prime rate, was already at over 10%. And here we have the Fed debating whether to increase 0.25% to 0.5%. And in Europe, the criminal, she has been convicted for corruption, Lagarde. But in politics, when you are a corrupted person, you are promoted. Some become presidents of big countries, by the way. And anyway, this Lagarde, she's the boss of the ECB. She says there's no need to increase interest rates. It's all temporary.
They're still going along with this.
They're a bunch of criminals. They deliberately hurt poor people, deliberately. They have education, they went to universities, they know that in inflationary times, poor people are hurt more than wealthy people.
Absolutely. So we are here seeing both monetary inflation and price inflation. It's not transitory like we've been told. We were told since 2020 it's transitory, just shut up, just sit down, it's transitory.
Well, now they say it's Putin. Now they say
now they'll push it there. Then next week it'll be something else.
To be fair to Putin, he solved the COVID crisis.
That's right. So we're in this environment as an investor or as just an individual. Where does it make sense to have our money under the assumption that we're going to continue on this path of, inflationary price spikes, all these things? Do we look in the past and say gold, silver, precious metals, land, these are the things you want to hold? Or are we in a completely new world today and those things don't hold as much weight as they once did? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, we can establish relationships, say, between equities, between the stock market. Say we take the S&P 500, and we take a basket of commodities such as the CRB. So at times, the CRB is very high, as it was in 1973, 74, and once again in 1980, and stocks were relatively low. And there are times when stocks are very high, like in 2000, and commodities were very low. In 99, gold was still below $300. The low was $255. So we can establish these relationships. At the present time, stocks are very high compared to commodities. So I think that resource shares related to oil and to agricultural commodities are relatively inexpensive. And I said, and for the last 20 years or so, you should buy a house in the countryside, far away from the socialists of California, New York, Baltimore, and Chicago, and near a river where you have water, where water supply is available, but not next to a bridge, because the bridges are used during war times and they shoot down the houses that are next to it. So this is one way to play it, or you can buy stocks that have some relationship to agricultural commodities, such as bungi. BG is the symbol, or in Brazil they have suppliers of beef, or in the US one company is also foreign-owned, JBS, and that's the old poultry farm, Pilgrim Poultry, or Pilgrim or something like this. Anyway, and in Thailand and in Asia, we have plantation companies that plant palm oil and so forth. So that's one way to play it. But I think the best, in the 70s, one of the best performing assets was farmland. So this is something to consider. Now, not everybody can be a farmer, and farming is a very professional thing. It's very hard work. So for the folks among your viewers, it's not the best occupation to be a farmer. I can tell you that.
For sure.
But
so
it's a way of life, and nowadays with the internet and all the communication that we have, you can do your business from any place in the world. You may be also during pandemics and so forth, you are safer in the countryside where nobody else lives than in a big city. Especially, it is possible that we will again have food shortages, not because of Putin, but because of all kinds of restrictions they have now on Russian trade and so forth. And so, we have to consider all these things. But in general, I'd say that gold is not that low, but I think it is relatively safe to hold some gold. So let's say if gold went down 20%, I think stocks might be down 50%. You understand?
Correct.
So I look at it this way. And I can't see how central banks in the near term will be able to push up interest rates to a level where inflation will be stopped. In other words, When you have an increase in commodity prices, such as we just had, it filters through many things with a time lag. You understand?
Yes.
The
Yes.
shop where you go shopping will increase prices. Now, some have done so in Germany. Aldi, which is a discounter, they increase prices by between 30 and 50%. But Lagarde, the brain damaged politician, corrupt politician, I have to point out, she says that inflation is transitory. So this is what you have, a corrupt group of bureaucrats that think they can do anything because they protect each other. And so I don't see any near-term solution. I think the central banks will increase interest rates cosmetically, like in the 70s, but inflation accelerated because the interest rate increases were never sufficient to bring down the rate of inflation. So as an example, when Mr. Trump was president, the question came up to appoint another Fed chairman. One of the candidates was John Taylor, Professor John Taylor of Stanford University. I've met him twice in my life. I like him a lot because he's a modest person, unlike the other Fed members who have an aura of arrogance that is, of course, accompanied by the incompetence they display. But John Taylor, he established what is called the Taylor rule. Taylor rule is a complex formula that uses employment and it uses inflation principally and so forth to determine by a model, by a computer model, what the rate of interest should be to be neutral on the system. In other words, in order to prevent inflation from accelerating and in order to prevent deflationary pressures from accelerating. According to this formula today, the Fed fund rate should be at 9.81%.
They're a little off on that one.
Like 0.25%.
Yeah, it's crazy.
When in the 1973, the oil shock happened and inflation briefly accelerated strongly, the 10-year treasury was over 10%. Now it's 2.5%. We are way out of line because all these people said, oh, we need negative interest rates, Professor Rogoff and Yellen and so forth. They were always money printers, including Bernanke. So this has caused huge hardship on Americans. First of all, the housing crash in 2000, 2008, 2007, 2008 impoverished many small house owners. They had borrowed a lot of money from people like these countrywide financial and so forth. He had to go to court because of fraudulent accusations, but he was, of course, freed, innocent. You understand? Someone in the financial field like I am, we're all innocent bystanders. What a joke.
It's crazy. So
it actually,
Marc,
it would be a joke if it was not tragic, because for society, these huge wealth inequalities then bring a poor social climate, belligerence, and a decline of society. This is undoubtedly the case.
That's what I talk about all the time. I mean, you want a strong economy, you need a strong middle class, you need growth, you need jobs, and so on. But today we seem to be going in the opposite
integrity.
Direction. Right.
You need Marc, especially voters who discriminate and don't vote for people who are dishonest. Unfortunately, if you look at Washington, they're all dishonest,
Yeah.
all of them. You look at European politicians, they're all dishonest, all of them.
Yes.
Not one is honest.
So
this is the
Marc,
system that democracies have created.
If we're in this environment right now, we got very low levels of interest rates globally. I'm watching the central banks around the world. They're saying we need to increase interest rates. It's happening slowly, very slowly, but it's sort of happening. At the same time, we've got inflation rates that are going up like crazy. Who knows what the real number is, but we know that they're going up. Where do we end up in the situation where, like, will we see asset prices just continuing to go up forever? Or does the Federal Reserve not being there with their quantitative easing start to create that, that deflation, that pull down effect? And we start to see, all those things that were way overvalued. We can argue about what those things are, certain types of stocks or cryptos or whatever that have gone off the charts. Are those things going to come down, or is just more money going to flow in forever and ever?
Well, as you know, the ARC Innovation Fund last year, from the peak in January 2021 to January this year, was down more than 50%. So a lot of stocks have come down. But I'd like to warn everyone among your viewers that the fact that the stock is down 50% does not make the stock any cheaper necessarily.
Right.
A stock can easily go down 95% before it bottoms. And in this respect, I mean, I'm one of the dinosaurs of the investment business because I'm one of the few people that has seen the boom in the early 70s and then the big bear market 73, 74 and so forth. So I've seen a lot, and I've seen in Asia the booms and the busts because I live in Asia since 1973. But my sense is that it's easily possible that stocks could drop by 50% very easily, and they wouldn't be terribly cheap. In Asia, we had big market declines over the last 5 years, certainly against the US market. So in emerging markets, I see some value, but not where I would say this is the bargain of the century. Right. You understand? Some values have developed, and someone will say to me, oh, this stock is very cheap. It's possible that among 1,000 stocks, one is very cheap. But I'm talking about in general, asset prices are not particularly good value, with the exceptions, as I said to you, in some cases in the countryside, say you go to Portugal, Spain, Italy, Sicily, Greece, Macedonia, Croatia, Serbia, Ukraine, you can buy probably properties quite cheaply in Mariupol now and in Odessa. But not everybody wants to live there. And at the moment, it may be a bit dangerous. But,
I see.
To take a bunker along.
That's right. So I see this argument all the time where don't try to be fancy with it. Just keep buying the biggest companies like Apple and Tesla because of, they name some fact. Tesla's going to have 1 million robo-taxis on the streets by the year 2020. We heard that one. Tesla's going to create a robot and they're going to, put you to bed at night and all these fanciful things. So why don't everybody just forget about diversification, forget about gold and land and everything? And why don't we just put all of our money into Apple, Tesla, and
Yes.
Amazon and what have you? So what's your thoughts on that? Because I see it all the time.
Yes, I want to give you my precise thoughts on that. In 1973, there was a period between 70 and 73 were so-called growth stocks. There were around 50 stocks, had performed very well. These companies were Sears and Kresge, it became Kmart, and Xerox, and Eastman Kodak, and Polaroid. Dr. Land, the founder of Polaroid, had more patents than any other individual or company in the world. Polaroid, okay? And the other growth stocks were Wang Labs and Digital, and some housing related stocks, Levitt's Furniture, and so forth and so on. You know how many of those survive? Very few, very few. And after 73, on average, they went down more than 70%. These stocks that you can buy and hold forever. I have a book here, Growing the Money Tree. You just have to invest in good quality companies and so forth. That they also said in Japan in 89. The Japanese market is still lower than in 89. In the year 2000, the big winners of the last few years, Facebook, Amazon existed, but not Google in 1999. Apple existed, but a lot of others. Netflix didn't exist. Zoom video didn't exist. Peloton didn't exist, and so forth and so on. So there are always new technologies. And personally, I think that, who knows, maybe Musk is a genius and maybe he isn't. But if he isn't, then there's a big risk in the stock at this valuation. And Apple, they are in businesses that are essentially where competition can come in.
Now, with ETFs, they've become obviously massively popular where people are simply saying, you know what, I don't know how to pick stocks. I don't know how to pick the next Tesla or the next Amazon. So I'm just going to invest in the broad market. I'm just going to put my money into the S&P 500. It's a low cost Vanguard fund or what have you. I'm going to put my money in there. So there's the one aspect of number one, is that a smart decision long term? But at the same time, if everybody, I've always speculated that if everybody rushed to the exits of an ETF, of a major ETF, because we have some sort of big collapse, do you foresee any problems with the ETFs just because of the way that they're structured and they're buying these companies in the way that they do to create a fund like this? We're talking about trillions of dollars here. And, what do you foresee any problems with that? I guess I'll word my question that way.
Well, I understand the question perfectly well. And yes, there could be a problem when everybody wants to sell. But you understand, if you own 50 stocks, the same stocks like in 73, they were called Nifty 50, or the quality growth stocks, or you own an ETF, it's about the same. I'd say if you own the US stock market through the S&P, you own an asset that is relatively highly priced. Say you could buy the European stock markets at much lower valuations. Some will say, well, it's lower quality. Who knows? But I can tell you, in emerging markets, I can buy the Latin American markets, Brazil, Argentina, and so forth, at much lower cost than, say, the S&P 500. The other thing I want to point out, since you asked me what investors should do, they should do one thing and to think. Because the Western media always says the whole world has sanctions around against Russia. The whole world is 10% of the world's population, led by the US and its vassals, the dumbed down governments in Europe, who are even worse than the American government. And this takes something to achieve under the Biden administration, but they managed to do that. And then the others who have a dictatorial attitude, like in Canada, he is a member of the WEF, the World Economic Forum. This is another criminal organization run by someone who, to my mind, looks actually like a Nazi. But people applaud him that Klaus Schwab is the messiah of the 21st century. But anyway, this is my view. It's a personal view. It's not a reflection of necessarily objectivity. But he mentions as his great alumni, Mr. Trudeau. If I had Trudeau in my school class, I would think I failed as a teacher. That's my view. I should have beaten the bugger more strongly. Anyway, the rest of the world is China, India, where more than 80% of the population lives. They haven't sanctioned Russia at all.
That's right. So one question
and
I have.
I feel ashamed for the first time in my life to be a Swiss, that the Swiss imposed, they froze the assets of Russian oligarchs.
Yes.
The Russian oligarchs are no good. But do you think the Chinese oligarchs are any better? Do you think the American oligarchs are any better?
That's right. I have this thing. I ask all my guests this question, and I think about it just about every day. The boom bust cycle that we enter into all the time. It's the same program over and over again. You look at it from the Great Depression up until the present, particularly with the Federal Reserve. Things get out of hand. Maybe inflation is going up. The Federal Reserve is too slow to act. Then they start increasing, and then they say, uh-oh, things are slowing down really fast. We got to stop. And then you see interest rates kind of just glide along, and then they realize, uh-oh, we're actually in a recession or a depression or what have you. And then they drop interest rates super fast, and this boom bust cycle that goes on. Do you think that, at least to some degree, that this is actually done intentionally to create that bust or that boom so that people on the inside can be taking advantage of it? Whether it's the Black Rocks or the Blackstones and all these different major organizations and others, those individuals on the inside, let's say.
I think this is a very interesting question, because if I look at the 19th century, 1800 to 1900, if you look at wholesale prices in the US in 1900, despite the population having grown from 3 million in 1800 to 70 million in 1900, despite having had all the industrialization and so forth, the price level was actually the same as in 1800. It had gone up during the Civil War, but then it came down. And because of the construction of canals and railroads, transportation costs collapsed. So the economy in the 19th century globally, and it is still today in many countries, was an agrarian economy. Industry was small, but it was growing after 1870 rapidly. But agriculture was still the largest employer until the Great Depression. Now it's maybe 2 to 3% of the workforce because of automation and productivity improvements and so forth. So anyway, what I want to say is the absence of a central bank led to stronger per capita income gains in real terms than it has in the 20th century. And wealth inequality expanded with the industrialization, because the Carnegies and so forth were smart guys, but they also worked a lot, and so they accumulated companies, and there was a kind of consolidation in industry. But at least the incomes in real terms of people increased. But now in the last 30, 40 years, I'd say this is statistically proven and established by the Federal Reserve. It's not my invention. I want to make this very clear. Someone at the age of 35 has less money than his parents had at the age of 35, and he earns less inflation adjusted. As simple as that. But of course, the media will always talk about Musk and how rich he is, and Jeff Bezos and so forth. This is one among 100 million. You understand? So this is all. The media has been bought, or the government has been bought by the media, so they work together to give the impression that the economy is strong when the economy is collapsing. If it wasn't for debt growth, they keep on printing money and so forth. And one day the bust cycle will emerge, and it will be a gigantic bust. That's why I say I don't know where to hide, but I would hide some money outside the Western alliance that took money away from the oligarchs. One day they will say, well, we'll take money away from you because you didn't take a vaccine. We take money of you because you didn't send your child to a government school. We'll take money of you because you said something about an American, African or something. They can do anything. This is the beginning of expropriation.
Certainly a brave new world.
Government officials will screw us. That is no question about it, because a king or a feudal, he was worried about his life, that they would chop off his head if he did a mistake. But the bureaucrats in Washington, they're not afraid of anything. They get their pensions. The worse jobs they get, the higher they're promoted, and the more pensions they get, and the more board seats their wives and children get.
Well, Marc, we can talk all day. I know you gotta go soon, but I wanted to ask you, China and Taiwan. Obviously, there's a lot of tensions going back and forth. We're seeing it in the news to some degree, and with everything going on with Russia, Ukraine, that started to spark much more curiosity about what could happen between China and Taiwan. In Ray Dalio's latest book, I'm not sure if you read it, but he basically says, if the if China does go for Taiwan, then the US probably wouldn't start a war over it. It's just not worth it for them. But I wanted to know your thoughts, if you think that will bring the US into a full-scale war, provocation, a proxy war, or perhaps they'll simply say, fine, take it. What do you think? What do you think?
Well, the honest answer is nobody knows for sure. Because unlike incompetent politicians like the current president of the US, Xi Jinping doesn't express a lot of views. The policies of China are, I wouldn't call them secretive, but they don't announce exactly what they think. This is the Asian way. If you know Asians well, it's very seldom that they will tell you upfront exactly what they think. They may be nice to you and think and tell you this and that, and the food is good and the weather is nice and so forth. But exactly what they think of you, they will never express. And so we don't know for sure, but my sense is that if we look at policies of Asian politicians in general, and specifically of Chinese, it's very pragmatic. And I don't think that China and Taiwan will go to war with each other, because they are very close ties between the two. You understand? Chinese families are in Taiwan, and Taiwanese families have ties to China and the villages and so forth. And so I don't think it will come to war. Now, if the US decided to build missile bases in Taiwan, for sure the Chinese would take them out, bomb them. Or they would just take out all the American military bases in Asia with one stroke.
Right.
One button. All the rockets are already prepared to be launched on American military bases and naval bases in Asia, whether it's in Okinawa or in the Philippines or in Singapore and so forth.
An interesting future ahead.
So I would think twice about going after China. And the Chinese are not aggressive, but if it came to their own country, you have to see in India, there's a very strong sense that India has been raped by colonialism. They don't realize all the good things that colonialism has done for the world. Nowadays, it's of course a sin to say such a thing. The world did a lot for poor countries in terms of helping them sustain economic growth by giving them a legal system that works and so forth and so on. That is never appreciated. But anyway, in the case of China, the feeling it will never come up in a discussion like it does regularly come up in India. But they are well aware that in the 19th century, between say 1850 and the revolution in China in the early 20th century, that during that time, countries, they all had their commercial interests in China and their missions and their armies and so forth. I mean, the Americans never officially had a territory in China, but they had an army division there. Yeah, you have to see the US has had expansion plans, imperialistic plans for a long time. It's nothing new.
Right. Well, Marc, I know we've taken a lot of your time today. If people want to find out more about you and Gloom Boom Doom or your book or what have you, where's the best place to find out more information?
Well, the website gloomboomdoom.com. Just in one word, Gloom Boom Doom, all in one word.
Right. I'll have
Google
the link.
My name, Marc Faber.
That's it. And don't forget to check out Tomorrow's Gold. I read this book.
It's a little bit out of date, but it's it was an observation that I made that I wrote it in 2001 or 2000. And the observation was that Asia would really emerge and become a very powerful economic unit in the world. And we can see that today. If you took China and India and then Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and so forth, it's a big portion of the global economy. Very important.
Absolutely. It was a great
book. But I always say we need peace. And I'm sorry to say, the typical American, he's not a warmonger. But there are so many people that make a lot of money out of wars and can distract the attention of people, like the Hunter Biden computer. This is a side note in the news. And some like NBC, ABC, and so forth, they never even discussed it. Never comes up. So it shows you something is very wrong with the system.
Absolutely. And it's our job to try and dig up as much as we can, but it's hard. That's for certain. That's for certain.
Well, don't worry. It's no better in Switzerland. They're also corrupt.
Okay, Marc, I want to thank you very much, everybody. We can all, I know on behalf of all my subscribers, everybody's thanking you for coming on today. And I hope maybe in 6 months or a year from now, we can do a follow-up interview.
Sure. Anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.